28 Years Later is a fascinating mess of a film. There's a really good movie in there, but it feels bogged down by too many ideas that don't seem thought out enough and a tone that just can't make up its mind. What we have is essentially a post apocalyptic coming of age story that's told in two halves. The first half is about a 12-year-old boy named Spike leaving the safety of his settlement with his father Jamie for the first time to find supplies on the mainland rage-infected UK. And I do have to admit, there is a lot to like in the first half. I really enjoyed seeing how the gated community that they lived in were working together to survive the apocalypse. They were sharing, farming, archery training, and using the small island of Lindisfarne just off the coast with only a sort of woman in black-esque causeway connecting them, which also adds a timescale and sense of tension for our main characters, as once the tide's in, the causeway is covered, and they'll be cut off from the safety of home until the tide rolls out again. Naturally, things don't go smoothly, and we get some pretty cool hints that there are other survivors out there, some less sane than others, while also being introduced to some new types of infected. I liked the action of the first half, and it's the closest this movie feels to the first two, with its tension-driven chase scenes and standoffs with the infected, despite feeling very different in its visual nature. Not just because it's a bigger budget and not filmed on early 2000s digital handhelds, but also because it's very artful in certain moments. This does also cause Years to begin to feel more of an art film than the gritty, realistic music video approach of the first movie. A feeling that will grow more extreme as the movie progresses, which was hit or miss for me. Mostly misses. The second half is about Spike and his mother venturing into the mainland, but unfortunately, the movie takes a few logical leaps to get to this point, and while I understand Boyle and Garland were making points about parenting and masculinity and growing up with all this stuff, I have real issue when subtext takes more importance over story, and that's partly what it feels like happens from this point in the movie onwards. It also feels like it nosedives into full-on cliche zombie horror, as there are random cuts to unrelated survivors and people being introduced just to be killed off shortly after to pad out the violence, and the main characters surviving situations that they never should have been written into in the first place. Some of the experimental editing all throughout the movie could also be really frustrating. As Jamie and Spike are leaving the settlement, there's a really strange and long montage of the infected running around, cut with shots of medieval archers defending the walls of a castle that would have felt just much better if cut in during an action scene. I get that the pandemic has put Britain back to the Dark Ages, but the scene felt randomly inserted in for the sake of being abstract and just ended up feeling unnatural. Another editing choice that honestly did really irritate me. For the first maybe 10 to 15 infected kills, there's a camera freeze during the point of impact where the shot pans around 90 degrees before continuing the kill like someone's just made a conversion on Madden. The first time it was kind of cool and different, but it gets annoying really quickly before finally stopping for the most part, but it does come back in the end. I'm also not a fan of the way the infected have developed. Essentially, there's three kinds of infected now. A crawler that's fat, slow, and shambles along the ground on all fours eating worms. There's the standard type we've seen in the other two movies, and now there's also an alpha that has super strength, is smarter and more patient than the rest, and takes a lot more hits to take down. It does feel like cliche zombie movie video game stuff, and somehow none of these things are as threatening as the infected in the first two movies, including the same type that we've seen in the first two movies. They all feel neutered at this point. There's a point where Spike, who I remind you is a 12-year-old, goes toe-to-toe with an alpha and he just doesn't get ripped apart, unlike the full-grown man about 10-15 seconds before that. Despite all of this, there is a really emotional climax that did have me kind of invested. Partly because of the acting, but it is mostly because of the soundtrack that's been fantastic through the entire movie, that is really effective and honestly does its share of the heavy lifting. I wish I could give credit to the story, but by the time we've hit this climax, the tone shifted so many times that I'm surprised the things I mentioned were good enough to make me care, even for the few minutes that I did. Unfortunately, though, the movie doesn't end there. We get a tease for the sequel that lasts a few too many minutes and is one final tone shift that may have just pushed the franchise over the edge for me. It's a huge shame. I'm a big fan of the first movie, and while it's nowhere near as good, the second does have its moments. As much as I do enjoy zombie movies, these are the only ones that have ever really affected me because of their gritty, realistic violence that was filmed in a setting that was very close to home for me. We've got no guns to protect us against these sort of hyper aggressive, fast, and highly contagious monsters, so I expected this film to carry that over. But apart from the opening scene, which still does really go over the top and seems more preoccupied with getting its subtext across than allowing the action to be effective, what I got was an art film that didn't work in favor to the story it was telling, with video gamey zombies and action weighed down by the plot armor some characters were wearing. I was looking forward to this one from announcement. I'm not looking forward to seeing the next one in January after this, despite the fact that Cillian Murphy is set to return, reprising his role of Jim from the first movie. This movie didn't feel like a 28 Days Later continuation. It felt like a whole new thing, which might have worked had it actually been its own thing. Good luck to 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple in January. I doubt Jim will fix this one.